I suppose, how do you approach clients who are struggling once you're working with them with sticking on a plan that you've set them with? Because this is something that I've personally had to deal with. And I say I dealt with, but really I was the problem. I've been put on plans and then I've just like totally negated listening to that. So like, what are some strategies that you would use to kind of help that person get back on track with their recovery?
It's hard to stick to an eating plan. As we would know, eating disorder doesn't want to gain weight or to, challenge any behaviors. I always think there has to be, some sort of part of you that wants to make change. So if eating disorder is 100%, sometimes the best thing you can do is just maintain where you are. And it's, it's just feeding that healthy self week by week, day by day, to try and see the, purpose of recovery. So there's, different sort of motivational activities that I would do with my clients, whether that be, sort of projecting into the future and trying to think about what your life would be like in 5-10 years time with and without the eating disorder, doing a lot of pro and cons lists. So the pros of having the eating disorder, not having the eating disorder, and what life would be like and what it actually means for you. Thinking about everything that you value in your life and what makes your life meaningful and how much of that is eating disorder. So often we do this in sort of like a pie chart. Some people do it as a flower with different petals representing what meaningful parts in their life, the percentage of their life that it represents, and just trying to build up those other aspects of your life so that the percentage of the eating disorder slowly reduces. I tend to make changes very slowly if someone's really struggling. So it's sort of like a micro change on their meal plan. It might be once a week to add, one extra glass of milk or something like that. Because every step, every extra mouthful really counts when you're recovering from an eating disorder. And definitely trying to, work with the person to see what's going to work with, for them, whether it be getting extra support at meal times, activities they can do after meal times, whatever's going to work, but it can be very individualized.
Yeah. And I think honestly, it has to be fairly individualized because everybody's issue, no matter what it is, honestly, is always somewhat different, and they're always at a different pace. So I think this is something too that I think a lot of in the mainstream medical community outside of the eating disorder and dietitians and stuff like that is they kind of look at it as a one size fits all problem. And it's one of those things where medicine's moving that way, but you just can't treat a lot of these type of things as that. It just doesn't work, or it doesn't work very long.
Yes, definitely with diets.
Yeah, no joke. I actually was curious for you, what has been personally one of your biggest hurdles working with clients that you've had, like as a dietitian working with clients? What was one of your hurdles as you've kind of been working with people, trying to help them in their recovery and stuff like that? Yeah,
there's probably a few. I think one is that, as you would know yourself, it can be draining. As I'm sure your family, friends, because it is such a long road to recovery. And when you are pushing against the eating disorder, sometimes it can be, I've never lost hope for someone, but sometimes it can just be like, you just feel a bit low sometimes, especially when you know how much that person wants to change, but the eating disorder is just so strong. I think the other thing is, when I first started in eating disorders, I probably made quite a few mistakes in terms of the language that I was using with my clients. So that's something that I've overcome. And just just acknowledging the strength of someone's eating disorder, and particularly if they have other comorbidities such as, personality disorders, OCD, So it's just trying to work with that in order to help them move forward.
Yeah, no, so yeah, and kind of going along the lines of that, like as someone with OCD, it made me a lot of my manifestation with eating disorders was with very number focused.
Yeah.
So I was very focused on like the down to the T macronutrient gram number of like everything that was ever touching my plate ever. And so when you have something like that, I found what I did with my therapist was we did sort of challenges where we would have a weekly challenge of like try not to do this or try to do this type of thing. Do you find that that type of stuff works really well as you kind of try to dribble it in there with your approach?
Yeah, so I normally have weekly homework, and often, I just say we're going to, can you commit to this 1 week experiment where we change X, Y, and Z? What's your hypothesis? Usually the hypothesis will be something like, I'll gain 5 kilos. Okay, can we challenge that? How, as a percentage, how much do you believe that that's going to be true? And then we commit to that challenge, and at the end of the week, we reevaluate. And it's just building up that evidence that food is not the enemy.
Yeah, actually, that's the biggest thing. That's kind of one thing I wanted to talk about with you next is how do we stop viewing unhealthy food, the unhealthy food like cake or whatever. Anything could be unhealthy. Some people look at a potato and they say that's unhealthy.
Yeah.
So how do we stop looking at food and kind of categorizing it, and then also making it like a reward? Like, how do we stop viewing unhealthy food as a reward in a binge eating situation, or just in general, really?
Yeah. So in general, I think, particularly for binge eating, but in general, it is including these foods as just part of normal eating. So especially someone that has binge eating disorder or bulimia, that they're avoiding these foods and they're restricting particular foods or food groups. It's like Adam and Eve. Eve couldn't have the apple and she eventually gave in. You're going to eventually give in to these foods, and that's what triggers overeating and binge eating. So by including these foods as part of your normal diet and committing to that experiment of what happens if I have one biscuit once a week, does my weight change? No. So again, it's just building up that evidence and challenging that black and white thinking, because I think with eating disorders, they love everything to be black and white, and nutrition is so gray, so many shades of gray, that you have to just keep challenging so that you get that flexibility back, because thinking's so rigid when it comes to these types of foods. So it's really just lots of experiments and just educating people about, the nutritional value of different foods. So all food provides us with energy, no matter what it is. I try to think of foods as being more nourishing and less nourishing options. So you want to have the more nourishing foods, which are those foods coming from the core food groups, your grains, fruit and veg, dairy, meat, etc., being on your plate most of the time, and then allowing yourself to have those more enjoyable foods as well. So that you're not restricting yourself of anything, because if you continually put cakes and biscuits and chocolate up on this pedestal, then you're never going to fully be able to recover.
Yeah, I was wondering if this is something that you do with any of your clients or not, because I've worked with a few dietitians, and one thing that I really liked with some of them was that they just changed one of the ways they did this and kind of uncategorized food was giving you a different way to look at it. So you look at food as like three different things, like, and I can't remember what they all are, but I like carbohydrates. Instead of saying carb, you say this is my energy or something like that. So are those sort of acronym changes, have those things you've implemented in your own practice?
Yeah, so that's definitely one strategy. So, for example, if you had I keep using biscuit as an example, but for some people they'd be like, this is fat. So I'd be like, what else could it be? This is enjoyment. This is food. That. This is fuel. This is, so it's renaming that. The other thing I use quite often is like a fear food list. So pretending that you're going through the supermarket and you're, putting in your trolley any other, any food that your eating disorder hasn't allowed you to have, and then categorizing it from the one that's the most challenging to the least, and just working from the bottom up, week by week, picking something that you can challenge. And usually if you start from the bottom, by the time you're sort of halfway up, you tend to realize that nothing's really changed, and that all food is sort of, it lessens the value that those fear foods have.
Yeah, and I think, all of the stuff that you've shared with us so far is really important. And I think that if there's one thing we can really take away at the end of it, is that I think it's important to find someone like yourself to work with when you're doing this, because for a long time, I, for one, thought that I could get on with most of it on my own. And I think there is this level of denial that all people with eating disorders share. There's like phases of eating disorders where you have like the denial phase. And in that phase, there's not too much you can do from an outside perspective, as far as like being a parent or somebody like that. But if you were to talk, let's say a parent is watching this and their kid is struggling, what would be something that you would mention to them as to kind of get the ball rolling for them, without making it seem like they're trying to force them into some sort of like prison camp type situation,
Yeah. So I would definitely recommend reading a book by Janet Treasure called How to Care for Your Loved One with an Eating Disorder. It gives you so many tips and strategies on how to actually support your loved one. But I think just being there for that person and letting them know that you understand that it's really difficult and you're there to support them, and that it's okay and that you will get through it. Because we know that eating disorders like to isolate people, and often they will push your family members away. So just acknowledging that, I think one thing, particularly with parents, is to let them know that it's not their fault, first of all, because often the parents carry a lot of guilt.
Yeah.
The way that they brought up their child has, created this eating disorder. So letting them know it's not their fault. And just, I guess it's educating them about how eating disorders work, that they will, the young person or just even an adult might display anger, frustration at that person, but just reinforcing that that's the eating disorder and it's not them. So it's not dividing that unit, that family unit apart.
Well, I really think you've shared a lot of really insightful stuff with us today. I really appreciate you taking the time to just sit down and talk to us. Even though Tommy's not here, you missed out on a good one, Tommy. But if you want to hear more from Talia here, you can find her on Instagram at TC Nutrition. She has a blog. She has all sorts of stuff. Is there any more you'd like to add where they can find you?
Just my website, so www.taliacecchele.com. I'm also on Facebook, Talia Cecchele Nutrition.
Awesome. Thank you so much again.
Thank you.